In this section of the training, you will learn about the documentation submission instructions and requirements for the Program Monitoring Random Validations process administered by the Federal Program Compliance Division at the Texas Education Agency. Preparing documents for upload for the random validation process is a two-step process. Step 1 includes gathering and assembling the documentation into one PDF formatted file, and Step 2 includes logging into the FPC WorkApp system to complete the details form and upload the documentation PDF file. We will go over Steps 1 and 2 in detail on the following slides. Step 1 includes gathering and assembling the documentation. LEAs are going to want to use the requested documentation section of the handbook to gather and organize the documentation that is being requested. The LEA should assemble the documentation in the order it is requested. For example, they should place their documentation with 1.1 being addressed first, 1.2 second, and so on. The LEA should also number their pages of the documentation file consecutively. Some tips to facilitate the documentation review process include ordering pages and numbering consecutively in the lower right-hand corner. It doesn't matter which orientation you use for your documentation. However, as in this example, you can see that the number of pages are not consecutively ordered correctly. We have 1, 2, and then 4. So you would want to make sure that your pages are ordered and numbered consecutively in the bottom right corner as shown in this example. Another tip for facilitating the documentation review process includes using the item number that's listed in the handbook section for documentation and marking the location on the documentation page that is submitted. For example, we would look for 1.1, what is requested of 1.1, and then you would mark it on the actual documentation that is submitted as 1.1. As referenced before, each documentation requested item number should be marked on the appropriate page of the documentation file being submitted for review. For example, in this documentation file, the LEA submitted 4 pages. On their first page, they have documentation referencing item 1.1 and documentation referencing item 1.2. So the LEA would want to make sure that they mark where 1.1 documentation is and where 1.2 documentation is. On page 4, there's information related to item 1.4, and the LEA has indicated it on page 4. Another tip for facilitating documentation review process includes not including unnecessary pages. The LEA should use caution when determining what to submit to TEA for review. The LEA should only include relevant pages of the documents that have been requested. Please note that all documentation that ends up being submitted by the LEA must be reviewed in its entirety. And should the review determine unanticipated areas of noncompliance under additional documentation that was submitted, the LEA will be referred to the appropriate division for further review. The LEA should keep in mind that there are some documentation file size limitations. Each PDF file has a limit of 30 megabytes. You would want to make sure that you optimize your PDF file to reduce the size. Ensure that only pages that are actually needed are included in the documentation file. And for last resort, if you have one file that is too large, you can split the file and upload multiple PDF files as per the instructions that are going to be following in the next couple of slides. Now that we have completed step 1 of preparing documents for upload, which was gathering and assembling the documentation into one PDF file, we will now take a look at how to log into the FPC WorkApp system to complete the details form and upload the documentation PDF formatted file. We will now take a look at the instructions for submitting the documentation that is being requested. All documentation requested will be submitted via the FPC Smartsheet WorkApp. LEA staff submitting documentation will need access to the Department of Grant Compliance and Administration WorkApp system. Currently, the Superintendent, Chief Financial Officer, and Federal Programs Director listed in Ask TED have been given access to the system. To add or change the individuals with access to the system, please email us at isasupport@tea.texas.gov for instructions on how to get that completed. Please note that each LEA is only guaranteed a certain number of access accounts at this time. To begin the documentation submission process, the person with access will want to log into the Department of Grant Compliance and Administration Smartsheets WorkApp system. The login page is shown on the right of the screen, where the person with access will need to enter their email address and the password to gain access to the Federal Program Compliance Division Random Validation WorkApp. Once you have logged into the Department of Grant Compliance and Administration WorkApp system, you will now click on the Federal Program Compliance Division WorkApp tile as shown on the right. After you have clicked on the Federal Program Compliance Division WorkApp tile, you will be given access to the Federal Program Compliance Division WorkApp. Once you're in the WorkApp, you're going to want to click on the Program Monitoring Random Validation link as shown on the right. Please note that the screen captures referenced in the next slides will show information that is specific to a Title I Part A program requirement. When you log into the system, the information referenced will include the information that is specific to the program and the requirement that your LEA was selected to submit documentation for. After you are in the Program Monitoring Random Validation Federal Program Compliance Division WorkApp, you'll be able to locate the line for the initial submission that includes your LEA name and CDN number, the stage of the random validation process, the program that you were selected to participate in, and the specific requirement. In this example, ABC ISD was selected for Title I Part A School-Wide Program Campus Comprehensive Needs Assessment Process. The LEA should make sure that they click on the Initial Submission line to access the Details Form and Data and Attachments tabs. Throughout the documentation review process, if the program manager decides that additional documentation is needed or that there are some clarifying questions that need to be asked prior to the final review of the documentation, the program manager may reach out to the LEA for additional submission. That is the only time that the additional submission line will be accessed. For initial submission, the LEA should click on the Initial Submission line to access the Details Form and Data and Attachments tab. Once you've clicked on the Initial Submission line, you will now be able to access and complete the Details Form Data tab. On the Details Form, the first thing you're going to see is the LEA name and CDN number, the program, and the requirement that the LEA was selected for to participate in the random validation process. In this example, the LEA was selected to participate in the Title I Part A program, Campus Written Parent and Family Engagement Policy. Below that is a section for the requested documentation. In this case, you can see up to 2 requested documentation pieces. In the Requested Documentation 1 page numbers, that's where you'll list the page numbers of the documentation file that is going to be submitted that correspond with the first requested documentation. So for example, if documentation for Requested Documentation 1 is found on pages 1 and 3, you would note 1 and 3 under the Requested Documentation 1 page numbers. If your Requested Documentation 2 is found on page 2, then you would note page 2 under Requested Documentation 2. Please note that you will also need to scroll down to be able to access the additional information that's on the Details Form Data tab. Once you've entered the requested documentation page numbers and scrolled down, you will now have access to the rest of the form. The rest of the form includes the LEA Program Contact Information section. In this section, you'll complete the remaining fields with the information for the LEA Program Contact. That should be the person that is most familiar with the documentation that was submitted. This is a person that TEA will contact if additional documentation is needed and/or if clarification is needed on the documentation that was submitted. In this section, you should include the LEA program contact name, their email address, and their phone number. Under the LEA program contact information section that is required is the LEA comment field. This LEA comment field is not required. However, if an LEA would like to share additional information related to the documentation that has been submitted, they can include it in this section so that the reviewer can have that context for the submission documentation that was submitted. The final field on this form is the LEA submission status field. On the LEA submission status, there's two options: in process and submission complete. In process means that you have not uploaded the attachments or the documentation needed to complete the submission process. Submission complete means that you've completed the Details Form Data tab. And you've also gone to the next tab, which is Attachments, which we'll discuss later on in this presentation. And you've uploaded the documentation and you now are ready for TEA to review your documentation. Please note that you must have a submission complete by the due date. If you are still in process, TEA will contact you to get your documentation submitted and uploaded in a timely manner so that the review can commence. The next step in the process is to save the information that was entered into the Details Form Data tab. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see a Save message. You'll note that if the Save button is grayed out and inaccessible, a required field is missing information. So as you can see here, the LEA has not filled in the program contact name, email address, or phone number, and therefore the Save button at the bottom of the screen is grayed out. Once the LEA completes that information and enters it, the Save button will be blue, which means that now the information can be saved. To save the information, you click on the Save button and the information will be saved. Once you have added all the information into the Details data form and you've saved it, you are now ready to attach your documentation PDF file. To do so, you're going to locate the Attachments tab at the top of the Details form. You click on it and it'll open the Details attachment form. You'll click on Attach a File, browse through your computer files, and locate the documentation file. Once you locate the documentation file, click on it and ensure that the file name reads what is the name of the file that you want to attach. Click Open, and you'll notice that on the Attachments tab, you'll see the file populate. That means that TEA now has access to the documentation that you've attached to the attachment file. You'll also note that under Attachments, you'll see 1 because there is one attachment that has been uploaded to the system. Once you've successfully attached your file, you're going to want to click on the X in the top right-hand corner to close the Details form. Now that you've attached your document and entered all the information in the Details Form Data tab, you're now ready to sign out of the WorkApp system. To sign out, you're going to want to locate the icon with the person, click on Sign Out, and you'll be able to sign out of the system successfully. This concludes the Documentation Submission Instructions and Requirements training portion of the Program Monitoring Random Validations process. If you have any additional questions, please email your questions to sssupport@tea.texas.gov. Thank you.